My name is Adelaide Peterson, and at 67 years old, I never expected to find myself at the center of a corporate drama. For 40 years, I poured my heart into teaching children and my evenings into perfecting family recipes passed down through generations. When my son-in-law James mocked my cooking at a dinner party for his fancy marketing firm colleagues, I felt my heart crack. But sometimes life serves the perfect recipe for humble pie, especially when his CEO took a bite of my apple pie and everything changed. Before I continue with my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy stories about family dynamics and sweet justice, please like and subscribe for more. Cooking has always been more than just a way to feed my family. It has been my connection to the past, my way of showing love, and my most cherished form of self-expression. I grew up in a small town outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where my grandmother Martha would invite me into her kitchen every Sunday after church. At just 7 years old, I would stand on a wooden stool beside her, watching in wonder as she transformed simple ingredients into dishes that brought our family together. My grandmother never used measuring cups. She would say, "Adelaide, cooking is about feeling the recipe in your heart, not just following words on a page." Still, I began collecting her recipes, writing them carefully on index cards that I kept in an old wooden box my grandfather made. That recipe box has followed me through 60 years of life, growing thicker with each passing decade. Those cards, some now yellowed with age and spotted with ingredients from kitchens past, are my most treasured possession. When I met my husband Thomas in college, one of our first dates was me cooking him my grandmother's pot roast. I remember how his eyes lit up with that first bite, and he joked that he might have to marry me for the recipe. 2 years later, he did just that. Throughout our 42 years of marriage, cooking remained my love language. I cooked when our daughter Sophia was born, when Thomas got promoted, when Sophia graduated high school and then college. I cooked through life's celebrations and sorrows. My apple pie became somewhat famous in our community. The recipe came from my grandmother's mother, who brought it from Sweden when she immigrated to America in the 1890s. The secret was in the blend of spices and the way the crust was prepared. That pie won me 3 blue ribbons at the county fair and requests for it at every community gathering and holiday. 5 years ago, Thomas passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, became a lonely place. The joy of cooking diminishes when you no longer have someone special to cook for. After 2 years of rattling around our family home alone, I made the decision to sell our house and move to Chicago to be closer to Sophia. She had settled there with her husband James after they got married 7 years ago. City life was an adjustment after decades in suburban Minnesota. My apartment was smaller, the pace faster, and the grocery stores nothing like what I was used to. But I found farmers markets that reminded me of home and slowly began to rebuild my cooking routine in this new environment. I discovered small specialty shops where I could find the ingredients for my traditional recipes. Cooking became my way of maintaining a sense of continuity in my dramatically changed life. My relationship with Sophia had always been close, though not without its challenges. As a teenager, she had rebelled against my traditional values, and we weathered some difficult years. When she met James in graduate school, I was initially pleased. He was ambitious, well-educated, and seemed to adore my daughter. But as I got to know him better, I noticed his tendency to measure everything and everyone by their status or usefulness to his career. James worked for a prestigious marketing firm, Wellington Anderson Partners. He had risen quickly through the ranks, becoming a junior partner within just 5 years. His ambition was admirable, but it often came with an air of superiority that made me uncomfortable. When we would visit for dinner, he would talk about exclusive restaurants and exotic dishes, while subtly dismissing the home-cooked meal in front of him. I tried to connect with James through food-preparing dishes I thought might impress him: French coq au vin, Italian risotto, Spanish paella. But he would always find some way to compare my efforts unfavorably to restaurants he had visited. His small comments accumulated over the years like tiny paper cuts. I never said anything to Sophia, not wanting to strain their marriage or my relationship with my daughter. 3 months ago, James was assigned a major project with a new client, a national restaurant chain looking to rebrand. This was apparently a big opportunity for him, as the company's CEO Harold Thompson was personally overseeing the project. When Sophia called to tell me that James wanted to host a dinner for Harold and some colleagues at their home, I was surprised when she asked if I would help prepare the meal. Apparently, their usual caterer was booked, and James had suggested that I might enjoy cooking for them. Sophia seemed hesitant as she explained, "Mom, these people have very sophisticated palates." But James thought it might be nice to have a home-cooked meal for a change. Despite the somewhat backhanded compliment, I was thrilled at the opportunity to cook for their guests and perhaps finally impress my son-in-law with what I could do in the kitchen. Little did I know this dinner would change everything. The dinner party was scheduled for a Friday evening, which gave me a full week to plan. I took this responsibility very seriously, spending days creating the perfect menu. I wanted to showcase my best dishes while ensuring they would appeal to urban professionals with, as James had put it, sophisticated palates. The first order of business was shopping for ingredients. I woke up early on Monday morning and took the bus to 3 different farmers markets across Chicago. At the Green City Market, I found the most beautiful free-range chickens from a local farm. The vendor, a kind woman named Susan, assured me they were raised humanely and fed an organic diet. This would be the centerpiece of my meal, herb-roasted chicken with my secret spice blend that included rosemary, thyme, and a touch of lavender. At the Daily Plaza Market, I selected seasonal vegetables. Fresh asparagus, fingerling potatoes, and baby carrots would make perfect sides. I also found local honey for my homemade dinner rolls. The honey came from hives kept on Chicago rooftops, which I found fascinating. Urban beekeeping was something I never would have imagined in my small-town upbringing. By the time I reached the Logan Square Farmers Market, my shopping bags were heavy, but my spirits were high. Here I purchased apples for my award-winning pie. The vendor recommended a mix of Honeycrisp and Granny Smith varieties for the perfect balance of sweetness and tartness. I also bought heavy cream from a small dairy farm for the homemade ice cream that would accompany the pie. Back at my apartment, I spread all my treasures across the kitchen counter and began organizing my plan of attack. I pulled out my recipe card, selecting the ones that had never failed to impress. My herb-roasted chicken would be the star, accompanied by garlic mashed potatoes, roasted seasonal vegetables with balsamic glaze, homemade dinner rolls with herb butter, and a spring salad with candied walnuts and goat cheese. For dessert, of course, my famous apple pie with vanilla bean ice cream. On Tuesday, Sophia came by to review my menu plans. She looked nervous as she scanned the recipe cards spread across my kitchen table. "This all looks delicious, Mom," she said. "But don't you think it's a bit home-style for Jameis, boss?" I felt a twinge of doubt. "What do you mean home-style?" She fidgeted with one of the recipe cards. "Well, they usually go to places like Alinea or Ever. You know, molecular gastronomy, deconstructed classics, that sort of thing." I had no idea what molecular gastronomy was, but I wasn't about to let my confidence be shaken. "Sophia, good food is good food. There's nothing wrong with home-style if it's done with quality ingredients and skill." She nodded, not looking entirely convinced. James just really wants to impress Harold. This account could mean a promotion to senior partner. "Then I'll make sure this meal is impressive," I assured her. "I've been cooking longer than these trendy chefs have been alive." After Sophia left, I spent the afternoon making lists and timelines. Wednesday would be for preparing components that could be made ahead. Thursday for baking the pie and dinner rolls. Friday morning for final preparations, leaving the afternoon for rest, before beginning the final cooking for the 7 o'clock dinner. On Wednesday morning, I overheard a conversation that nearly made me abandon the whole plan. I had arrived at Sophia and Jameis' house early to familiarize myself with their kitchen setup. As I approached the back door, I heard Jameis' voice through the partially open window. "I don't know why you suggested your mother cook, Sophia. Her food is so basic. These people eat at Michelin-starred restaurants. They're going to think we're provincial." Sophia sounded defensive. "You were the one who said we needed a home-cooked meal because Harold is tired of restaurant dining." "Yes, home-cooked by someone who knows what these people expect, not retirement home food." I stood frozen outside the door, my hand halfway to the knob. Retirement home food. Is that how he thought of my cooking? The recipes that had nourished my family for generations, that had won county fair ribbons, that had been requested at every community event. For a moment, I considered turning around and going home. Let them figure out their own dinner party. But then I straightened my spine. No, I would not give James the satisfaction. Instead, I would prove him wrong. My food wasn't basic or retirement home fare. It was authentic, made with love and skill, and I would make it the best meal those corporate executives had ever tasted. I knocked loudly on the door before entering, giving them time to end their conversation. James looked startled when he saw me, a flash of guilt crossing his face before he masked it with his usual polite smile. "Adelaide, you're early. Sophia was just about to call you about the dinner." I smiled back, determined not to let him see that his words had wounded me. "I thought I'd come by and check out the kitchen setup, make sure I have everything I need for Friday." The day before the dinner, I baked my apple pie. The process was therapeutic, the familiar motions of rolling out dough and slicing apples, calming my nerves. I added my special blend of cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom, and a pinch of cloves. The secret ingredient passed down from my grandmother was a tablespoon of bourbon that deepened the flavors and aroma. I also baked the dinner rolls using my tried-and-true recipe that produced soft, pillowy rolls with a golden crust. The dough rose beautifully in my warm kitchen, and the scent of baking bread filled my apartment. These would be served warm with the herb butter I would make Friday morning. By Friday morning, my nerves were beginning to get the better of me. What if James was right? What if my cooking really was too simple for these sophisticated business people? I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on my preparations. I arrived at Sophia and James' house at noon, carrying containers of prepared foods and my remaining ingredients. Their kitchen was sleek and modern, with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked barely used. It was clear this was not a space where much cooking happened. I set about organizing my workspace, laying out my ingredients and tools in the order I would need them. James popped his head in several times throughout the afternoon, each visit increasing my anxiety. He kept asking if I was sure about certain dishes, suggesting last-minute changes, wondering if perhaps we should have some store-bought appetizers as a backup. "James," I finally said, my patience wearing thin, "I've been cooking since before you were born. Please let me do what you asked me to do." He looked taken aback, then gave a tight smile. "Of course, Adelaide. I'm just nervous about tonight. This dinner could really impact my career." I softened slightly. "I understand, but trust me, the food will be delicious." As the afternoon progressed, I prepared the herb butter, for the rolls made the salad dressing, and prepped all the vegetables. The chickens were patted dry, seasoned with my special blend, and left to come to room temperature before roasting. Everything was on schedule. At 5 o'clock, I took a short break, changing into the outfit I had brought with me, a simple but elegant navy blue dress that Thomas had always loved. I refreshed my makeup and put on the pearl earrings that had been a gift for our 40th anniversary. I wanted to look the part of the accomplished home cook, not the frumpy mother-in-law. By 6:30, the house was filled with the mouth-watering aroma of roasting chicken and freshly baked bread being warmed in the oven. The table was set beautifully with Sophia's best china and crystal. Candles were lit, soft music played in the background, and I was putting the finishing touches on the appetizers. Everything was perfect. Or so I thought, until the doorbell rang at 6:45 and James came rushing into the kitchen, panic in his eyes. "They're early. Is everything ready?" he demanded. I calmly wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. "The appetizers are ready to go out. The rest is on schedule." He nodded distractedly, then leaned in to whisper, "Please, Adelaide, this dinner is really important to me." I looked him in the eye. "James, I know. The food will be delicious. Now go greet your guests." He straightened his tie and left the kitchen. I took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and prepared to face the evening ahead. The sound of voices and laughter filtered into the kitchen as James welcomed his guests. I arranged the last of my appetizers on serving platters, small pastry cups filled with goat cheese and caramelized onions and cucumber rounds, topped with smoked salmon and dill cream. Simple perhaps, but elegant and flavorful. Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking nervous but beautiful in a burgundy dress. "Mom, they're all here. Harold Thompson and his wife Patricia just arrived." I smoothed my dress and picked up the trays of appetizers. Time to meet the people who had James so wound up. Sophia led the way into the living room where 5 people stood chatting, drinks in hand. James was talking animatedly with a tall, distinguished-looking man who I assumed was Harold Thompson, the CEO. "Everyone," James announced as we entered, "this is Sophia's mother Adelaide, who has graciously prepared our meal tonight." All eyes turned to me, and I felt a moment of stage fright. Then I reminded myself that I'd been feeding people all my life. This was no different. "Hello everyone," I said, setting down the trays on the coffee table. "I hope you'll enjoy these little bites to start." Harold Thompson stepped forward immediately, his hand extended. His silver hair and tailored suit spoke of success, but his smile seemed genuine. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, shaking my hand warmly, "James tells me you've prepared a home-cooked meal for us tonight. That's a rare treat." "Please call me Adelaide," I replied, warming to his friendly manner. "And yes, everything is made from scratch." James quickly introduced the other guests. Patricia Thompson, Harold's wife, was a petite woman, with intelligent eyes who immediately asked about my recipes. Allison Kim, the marketing director, was a stylishly dressed woman in her 40s who complimented my appetizer presentation. The other 2 were David Martinez, creative director, and his wife Laura. James hovered nervously as everyone sampled the appetizers, interjecting before anyone could comment. "My mother-in-law enjoys cooking as a hobby," he explained, as if preemptively apologizing for what was to come. I noticed Harold and Patricia exchange a glance at this comment, but they said nothing. Instead, Harold turned to me. "So Adelaide, James mentioned you're from Minnesota originally." "Yes, a small town outside Minneapolis," I replied. "No kidding, I'm from Rochester myself. Moved to Chicago for college and never left, but I still miss those Minnesota summers." This simple connection visibly relaxed James, who laughed a bit too loudly. "What are the chances?" he said. "Small world." As the conversation continued, I was pleased to hear appreciative comments about my appetizers. Patricia particularly enjoyed the goat cheese pastries, asking what herbs I had used in the caramelization. Allison Kim took a second salmon canapé, noting that the dill cream was perfectly balanced. I excused myself to check on the main course, feeling more confident. In the kitchen, I basted the chickens, which were turning a beautiful golden brown, and gave the potatoes a final stir. The vegetables were roasting perfectly, and the rolls were staying warm in the oven. Everything was on track. When I returned to the living room, the conversation had turned to food. Harold was talking about his favorite restaurants. "Don't get me wrong," he was saying, "I appreciate fine dining as much as anyone. But sometimes I think we've lost touch with real food, you know, food with history and soul." James looked slightly alarmed at this turn in the conversation. "Well, that's why we thought a home-cooked meal might be a nice change of pace," he said quickly. "Though of course it's nothing like what you're used to." I felt a twinge of irritation at his continued apologetic tone, but kept my expression neutral. I noticed Patricia Thompson watching me, a slight smile on her face, as if she understood exactly what I was thinking. Soon it was time to serve dinner. Sophia helped me bring out the food while James seated everyone at the dining table. I had insisted on serving family style with large platters in the center of the table rather than plated portions. This was how food was meant to be shared, in my opinion. First came the roasted chickens, golden and fragrant on a large platter, garnished with fresh herbs and lemon slices. Then the garlic mashed potatoes in a beautiful ceramic bowl that had belonged to my mother. The roasted vegetables glistening with balsamic glaze came next, followed by the spring salad in a wooden bowl Thomas had made for me for our 25th anniversary. Finally, a basket of warm dinner rolls and a crock of herb butter. The presentation was rustic but beautiful. As I set down the last dish, I felt a surge of pride. Whatever James might think, this was a meal prepared with skill and love, and it looked wonderful. There was a moment of silence as everyone took in the spread before them. Then Harold Thompson spoke up. "Well, this looks absolutely delicious, Adelaide. A feast for the eyes as well as the stomach." James was quick to interject. "It's very home-style, of course. Simple country cooking. He laughed slightly. Nothing like Alinea, I'm afraid. I saw Patricia Thompson's eyebrows raise slightly at this comment, but she said nothing, instead turning to me. Adelaide, would you mind serving? Everything looks wonderful. The serving began, and soon everyone had full plates. I watched anxiously as they took their first bites. Harold made an appreciative sound as he tasted the chicken. This is excellent, he said. What is in this spice blend? It's familiar, but I can't quite place it. Before I could answer, James cut in. It's probably just the usual, rosemary thyme. Actually, I said, keeping my voice level, it's a blend my grandmother taught me. Rosemary and thyme, yes, but also lavender, which adds a subtle floral note and a touch of smoked paprika for depth. Harold nodded appreciatively. That's it, the lavender. Unusual, but delicious. The conversation flowed as everyone ate, with several compliments on the food. The vegetables were pronounced perfectly cooked, the potatoes creamy and flavorful. Even Allison Kim, who James had warned was a notorious food snob, went back for seconds of the salad, commenting on the balance of flavors in the dressing. James seemed to relax slightly as the meal progressed without disaster, though I noticed he kept steering the conversation away from the food whenever possible. When Harold asked about my cooking background, James quickly changed the subject to the new marketing campaign they were working on. Despite James' attempts to downplay my contribution, I was feeling quite pleased with how the meal was being received. The tension in my shoulders began to ease as I enjoyed my own food and the pleasant company. Patricia Thompson engaged me in conversation about Minnesota, and we discovered a mutual love of gardening. Just as I was beginning to think the evening was a success, after all, James decided to make a joke at my expense. It was when Harold was complimenting the dinner rolls. Adelaide, these are exceptional, Harold said, taking a second roll. You don't often taste bread this good outside of artisanal bakeries. James laughed, a sound that immediately put me on edge. Well, my mother-in-law has had plenty of time to perfect her recipes. Retirement has its benefits. There was an awkward pause, and I saw Sophia shoot her husband a warning glance. Actually, I said lightly, I've been making these rolls since I was in my 20s. The recipe was my grandmother's. But James wasn't finished. He raised his wine glass in a mock toast. To Adelaide's interesting cooking. It's not every day we get to experience authentic home cooking. The way he said authentic made it sound like a euphemism for outdated or unsophisticated. I felt my face grow warm, but kept my expression pleasant. The conversation moved on, but I noticed that both Harold and Patricia were watching James more carefully now. The dinner continued smoothly until the main course was finished. I was clearing plates, preparing to bring out dessert, when I heard James make the comment that would change the course of the evening. Well, he said with a laugh. That sounded forced. I hope everyone enjoyed their trip down memory lane with dinner. It's not exactly the molecular gastronomy you're used to. Harold looked puzzled. It was excellent food, James. Sometimes the classics are classics for a reason. But James, perhaps emboldened by too much wine or nervous energy, continued. It's certainly interesting to taste food like this. He lowered his voice slightly, though not enough. Tastes like retirement home. Food, doesn't it? There was a shocked silence, then a few nervous laughs from his colleagues, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict him. I had just stepped back into the dining room with a stack of plates when I heard the comment, and I froze in place. James, Sophia hissed, her face flushed with embarrassment. James waved a dismissive hand. Oh, Mom knows, I'm just teasing, don't you, Adelaide? He turned to the table. My mother-in-law is a good sport, but seriously, next time we'll take you to Oriole. Now that's a dining experience. I felt as if it'd been slapped. The words retirement home food echoed in my head, confirming what Head said earlier when he thought I couldn't hear. Every doubt Id had about my cooking, about my place in this modern world, about my value to my daughter's family came rushing back. But years of teaching had taught me how to maintain composure even when hurt. I smiled tightly and continued collecting plates. I saw pity in Patricia Thompson's eyes, which was almost worse than James' mockery. Do you need help, Mom? Sophia asked, half rising from her chair, her voice tinged with guilt. No thank you, dear, I managed to say. I'll just get dessert ready." In the kitchen, I set down the plates and gripped the edge of the counter, taking deep breaths. I would not cry. I would not give James the satisfaction of knowing how deeply his words had cut. The pie was cooling on the counter, golden and perfect. The ice cream was in the freezer, ready to be scooped. I had worked too hard to give up now. As I arranged dessert plates, I could hear the conversation continuing in the dining room. James was now apologizing for my old-fashioned cooking. "Next time, well, make reservations somewhere special," he was saying. "Somewhere more suited to your palates." I actually thought dinner was delicious. I heard Allison Kim say, though her voice was hesitant, as if she didn't want to contradict her boss. James laughed again. "Well, it's home cooking, isn't it nostalgic if nothing else? Speaking of which, wait until you hear about our nostalgic angle for the new campaign." And just like that, he had redirected the conversation to work, dismissing my effort entirely. I felt my hand shake slightly as I sliced the apple pie. Each piece was perfect, the filling holding its shape, the crust flaky and golden. This was my signature dish, the one that had won blue ribbons. No matter what James thought, I knew it was exceptional. I took a moment to compose myself, checking my reflection in the small mirror by the kitchen door. My eyes were bright with unshed tears, but my makeup was intact. I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and picked up the tray with the pie and a bowl of freshly whipped cream. The ice cream would come last. As I re-entered the dining room, the conversation paused. All eyes turned to the pie, its aroma preceding it into the room. "Dessert is served," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My apple pie. The recipe has been in my family for 4 generations." James looked at the pie with barely concealed disdain. "Mom always insists on making dessert from scratch," he said to the table. "Old habits die hard, I guess." I saw Sophia cringe at his words, but she remained silent. My disappointment in her inability to defend me was almost as painful as James' mockery. I had raised her to be stronger than this. Harold Thompson was watching the interaction closely, his expression unreadable. I served him the first slice of pie, adding a dollop of whipped cream. "Would anyone like ice cream as well?" I asked. "It's homemade vanilla bean." Harold raised his eyebrows. "Homemade ice cream, too. You went all out, Adelaide." "Just Grandma's recipe," I said modestly. "I'll bring it out." In the kitchen, I scooped the ice cream into a crystal bowl, another wedding gift from long ago. As I worked, I could hear the murmur of conversation from the dining room, though not the specific words. Part of me wanted to simply leave to call a taxi and go back to my apartment, away from James, cutting remarks, and Sophia's silent complicity. But that would be admitting defeat. I had taught elementary school for 40 years. I'd dealt with difficult parents, unruly children, and bureaucratic administrators. I could certainly handle one condescending son-in-law. I returned to the dining room with the ice cream and served everyone who wanted some. Then I took my own seat and prepared to endure whatever else the evening might bring. Harold Thompson took a bite of the apple pie with ice cream, and an extraordinary thing happened. He stopped mid-conversation with James, held up a hand, and closed his eyes. The table fell silent. After a moment, he opened his eyes and looked directly at me. "Adelaide," he said, his voice serious. "This pie is exceptional." James gave a nervous laugh. "It's just an old family recipe." Harold shook his head, ignoring James completely. "No, this is truly remarkable. The balance of spices, the texture of the apples, the crust." He took another bite, closing his eyes again briefly. "This reminds me of a pie my grandmother used to make when I was a child in Minnesota." Patricia nodded in agreement. "It's absolutely delicious, Adelaide. I haven't tasted a pie like this since my own mother's baking." I felt a flush of pleasure at their sincere appreciation. "Thank you. The recipe came from my grandmother's mother, who brought it from Sweden when she immigrated." Harold set down his fork and leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Sweden, you say? My family's from Sweden too, settled in Minnesota in the 1880s. "Mine as well," I replied, surprised by the connection. "My great-grandmother came in 1893 to be exact." Harold turned to Patricia. "Isn't that something?" He looked back at me. "Does your pie recipe have cardamom in it? That's what I'm tasting that took me back." I nodded. pleased that Head identified the distinctive spice. Yes, and a touch of bourbon that isn't traditional, but I find it enhances the other flavors. To my astonishment, Harold Thompson suddenly stood up. Everyone at the table looked startled, especially James, whose face had drained of color. Adelaide, Harold said formally, I need to know more about your cooking. This isn't just good home cooking. This is exceptional food with history and soul, exactly what I was talking about earlier. James started to speak, but Harold continued, still standing. Would you mind telling me about your approach to cooking? Your philosophy, if you will? I was taken aback by his intensity, but flattered by his interest. Well, I believe in respecting the ingredients, using the best quality you can find, and letting their natural flavors shine. My grandmother taught me that good cooking is about love and attention to detail, not showing off or being trendy. Harold nodded, still standing. And your herb-roasted chicken, the spice blend, is your own creation. Yes, developed over many years of experimentation. The lavender is unusual, but it adds a subtle note that people often can't identify but really enjoy. Harold finally sat down, but his focus remained entirely on me. Have you ever cooked professionally, Adelaide? James interjected before I could answer. Oh no, cooking is just a hobby for my mother-in-law. She's a retired elementary school teacher. I gave James a level look, then turned back to Harold. Teaching was my career and my calling, and I loved it, but cooking has been my passion. While I've never cooked professionally, in the sense of working in a restaurant, I did cater many community events over the years, and my recipes have won several competitions at the Minnesota State Fair. Harold seemed increasingly intrigued. The Minnesota State Fair is legendary for its food competition. Which categories did you win? I allowed myself a small smile of pride. My apple pie won the blue ribbon 3 years running in the heritage recipe category, and my bread won twice in the artisanal bread division. Harold turned to his wife. Patricia, do you remember that discussion we had last month about the new venture? Patricia nodded, a smile spreading across her face. I was thinking the exact same thing. James looked from one to the other, clearly confused and increasingly anxious. What new venture? Harold turned back to me, ignoring James' question. Adelaide, are you familiar with our company Wellington Anderson Partners? Only that James works there as a marketing partner, I replied honestly. Harold nodded. We're a marketing firm, yes, but we specialize in food and hospitality brands. James is working on a project for us that involves a new restaurant concept, impersonally developing. Now he looked at James. We've been struggling with the authenticity angle, haven't we, James? Trying to find a way to make heartland American cuisine feel genuine in an urban setting. James nodded, looking uncertain. Yes, that's been a challenge. Harold gestured to the remnants of the pie on his plate. This is what I've been trying to explain to your team. Food with history, with a story behind it. Not manufactured nostalgia, but the real thing. He turned back to me. Adelaide, would you tell me more about your other signature dishes? For the next 20 minutes, the dinner party transformed into a conversation almost exclusively between Harold and me, with occasional input from Patricia. I told him about my pot roast with root vegetables, my Swedish meatballs, my wild rice soup, and many other dishes that had been passed down through generations or developed during my years of cooking. James watched this exchange with increasing discomfort, trying several times to insert himself into the conversation, but Harold remained focused on me. The other guests seemed fascinated by the turn of events, particularly Alice and Kim, who began asking detailed questions about my cooking techniques. I found myself enjoying the conversation immensely. It had been a long time since anyone had taken such a genuine interest in my cooking, and never someone with Harold's obvious sophistication and knowledge about food. As the discussion continued, I noticed Sophia watching her husband with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She had remained largely silent during his earlier mockery, but now seemed to be reassessing the situation as she witnessed Harold's clear respect for my culinary knowledge. Finally, Harold turned to James. You know, James, when you first pitched the nostalgic American cuisine concept, I wasn't convinced. It seemed like another marketing gimmick. But sitting here tonight eating Adelaide's food and hearing about the history behind her recipes, seeing what it could be. James attempted to recover straightening in his chair. Yes, exactly what I was thinking. We could create a whole narrative around this type of authentic cooking. Harold raised an eyebrow. Yet earlier you were dismissing it as retirement home food. The table fell silent. James flushed deeply. I was just joking, of course. I have tremendous respect for Adelaide's cooking. Harold looked unconvinced. Well, regardless, I think we've stumbled onto something important here tonight. He turned to me again. Adelaide, I have a rather unusual question for you. Would you be willing to share your recipe collection with me? For professional consultation, of course. I would compensate you for your time and expertise. I was stunned by the request. My recipe collection? It's just handwritten cards in an old box. Exactly, Harold said with enthusiasm. Authentic family recipes with history, not something developed in a test kitchen to seem home-style. That's precisely what we're looking for. James leaned forward urgently. I could work with Adelaide on this, Harold. We could digitize her recipes, create a marketing narrative around them. Harold gave James a cool look. Perhaps. But first I'd like to speak directly with Adelaide about her collection and approach. I think her expertise should be central to this, not filtered through marketing language. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My recipes, my humble family dishes that James had so recently mocked, were now the center of a business discussion with the CEO of his company. The irony was not lost on me, nor judging by the expressions around the table on anyone else present. As the dinner party began to wind down, Harold returned to the subject of my cooking. Adelaide, he said, his tone. Now, businesslike, I want to tell you about a project I've been developing. He explained that Wellington Anderson Partners wasn't just marketing the new restaurant concept, but that he was personally investing in it. The idea was to create a chain of farm-to-table restaurants focused on authentic American comfort food with a story behind each dish. What we've been missing, Harold continued, is that authenticity. The chef we hired has technical skills, but the food lacks soul. That's what I tasted in your cooking tonight, particularly that chicken dish that James had some comments about earlier. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but remained silent. Harold looked directly at me. I'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing you on as a consultant for the menu development. Your recipes, your techniques, your understanding of how these traditional dishes should taste, that's what we need. I was speechless for a moment. Me, a consultant. At my age? Patricia leaned forward. Harold isn't just being polite, Adelaide. He's been talking about finding someone like you for months, someone with genuine knowledge of heartland cooking traditions. The fact that you're also James' mother-in-law is just a coincidence. I looked at James, whose face was a mixture of disbelief and calculation. He was clearly trying to figure out how to insert himself into this unexpected development. Harold, he said, clearing his throat, this is an interesting idea, but maybe we should discuss the details at the office on Monday. Harold shook his head. Actually, I'd like to get Adelaide's contact information tonight and set up a meeting directly. This would be separate from your campaign work, James. James looked as if he'd been slapped. But she's my mother-in-law. Surely I should be involved in any business discussions. Harold's expression cooled noticeably. James, earlier this evening you referred to Adelaide's cooking as retirement home food. You've made it quite clear that you don't value her culinary expertise. So no, I don't think you need to be involved in these discussions. The room went silent. Sophia was staring at her plate, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Allison Kim and the Martinezes exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, but also fascinated by the turn of events. James attempted to recover. Harold, that was just a joke between family members. Of course I value Adelaide's cooking. Why else would I have asked her to prepare dinner tonight? Harold raised an eyebrow. Based on what I heard earlier, it sounded like you asked her because your caterer wasn't available. I felt a surge of satisfaction at seeing James confronted with his own behavior, though I took no pleasure in his obvious discomfort. For years, it endured his subtle and not so subtle put-downs, always maintaining my dignity and refusing to cause conflict for Sophia's sake. Adelaide. Harold continued turning away from James. I'm serious about this opportunity. We'd pay you as a professional consultant to work with our development team on recipe creation and authentic techniques. Your name and story could even be featured in the restaurant concept if you're comfortable with that. I was overwhelmed by the offer but intrigued. It would be something meaningful to do, a way to share my lifelong passion and knowledge with a wider audience. And though I tried not to dwell on it, a way to prove to James once and for all that my cooking wasn't outdated or unsophisticated. I'd be very interested in discussing this further, I said carefully. Cooking has always been my joy, and the idea of sharing these family recipes more broadly is appealing. Harold smiled broadly. Excellent. He pulled out a business card and handed it to me. Call my assistant on Monday to set up a meeting. I'd like to bring you into our test kitchen as soon as possible. James made one more attempt to insert himself. I could bring Adelaide to the office, help get her oriented to our processes. Harold didn't even look at him as he replied. That won't be necessary, James. My assistant will arrange everything directly with Adelaide. He turned to me with a warm smile. And please bring your recipe box to the meeting. I'd love to see those handwritten cards. As the evening drew to a close, the dynamic had completely shifted. Harold and Patricia treated me like a valued colleague rather than just their employee's mother-in-law. Alice and Kim asked for my contact information, as well, mentioning that she'd love to discuss traditional cooking techniques for another client they represented. James remained subdued for the remainder of the evening, his earlier confidence deflated by Harold's obvious dismissal. Sophia seemed torn between embarrassment over her husband's behavior and pride in her mother's unexpected recognition. As the guests prepared to leave, Harold shook my hand warmly. Adelaide, thank you for an exceptional meal and an enlightening evening. I haven't enjoyed a dinner party this much in years. The genuine appreciation in his voice was worth more than any consulting fee he might offer. After a lifetime of cooking for people I loved, having my skill recognized professionally was deeply satisfying. When the front door closed behind the last guest, James turned to me, his expression a mixture of anger and calculation. Well, that was quite a performance, Adelaide. Performance, I said calmly. I just cooked the same food I've always cooked. And somehow managed to charm Harold into offering you a consulting job. He laughed without humor. What are the odds? Sophia stepped between us, her face flushed. Stop it, James. Mom didn't plan this. You're the one who mocked her cooking and embarrassed all of us. James looked at his wife in surprise. He wasn't used to her challenging him. I don't want to cause any family discord, I said carefully. The consulting opportunity is unexpected but welcome. I think it's best if I head home now. Thank you for allowing me to cook in your kitchen. As I gathered my things, I heard James and Sophia beginning to argue in hushed tones. I slipped out quietly, calling a rideshare service from my phone. On the drive back to my apartment, I reflected on the extraordinary turn the evening had taken. What had begun as an attempt to please my difficult son-in-law had ended with a professional opportunity I never would have imagined possible at my age. Life truly did work in mysterious ways sometimes. And the look on James' face when Harold had dismissed him and focused on me instead was one I wouldn't soon forget. Not because I enjoyed his humiliation, but because for the first time he had been forced to see me as something more than just his wife's aging mother who made old-fashioned food. As my driver pulled up to my apartment building, I realized I was smiling. Tomorrow I would call Sophia and make sure she was okay. But tonight I would savor this unexpected victory, and the sweet knowledge that sometimes justice comes in the form of an apple pie. The morning after the dinner party, I woke to a text message from Sophia asking if she could come over. When she arrived at my apartment an hour later, her eyes were red from crying. Mom, I'm so sorry about last night, she said as soon as I opened the door. The things James said were unforgivable. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake slightly. It's okay, sweetie. No, it's not, she insisted, pulling back to look at me. Has been dismissive of your cooking for years and I never said anything. I should have stood up for you. We moved to the living room where I made us tea, a ritual that had comforted us through many difficult conversations over the years. James showed up at my apartment, around noon, looking uncomfortable but determined. I'd expected him to come, but not so soon. "Adelaide," he began formally. "I want to apologize for my behavior last night. It was inappropriate and disrespectful." I could tell the apology wasn't entirely sincere, more a strategic move to mitigate the damage to his career prospects. But I had no interest in prolonging the conflict. "Thank you for the apology, James," I said evenly. "I accept it." He nodded, then cleared his throat. "About this consulting opportunity with Harold, I think it would be best if I facilitated the communication. After all, I understand the company culture and expectations." Sophia gave her husband an incredulous look. "James, did you not hear anything Harold said last night? He specifically doesn't want you involved." James flushed. "That's ridiculous. I'm a partner at the firm. Of course he'll be involved." I set down my teacup carefully. "James, I appreciate your concern, but Harold was quite clear that he wants to work with me directly. I think we should respect his wishes." James opened his mouth to argue further, but Sophia cut him off. "Stop it, James. This is Mom's opportunity, not yours. For once, just step back and let her have this without trying to control it or take credit." I was surprised by Sophia's forceful defense, and apparently so was James. He stared at his wife for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "Fine, I'll stay out of it." The tension in the room was palpable, but I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For years, I'd walked on eggshells around James, trying not to cause conflict between him and Sophia, accepting his subtle put-downs with quiet dignity. Now, finally, the dynamics were changing. The following Monday, I called Harold's assistant and scheduled a meeting for Wednesday. When I arrived at the imposing glass office building in downtown Chicago, I was nervous, but excited. I carried my wooden recipe box, the one my grandfather had made, containing decades of culinary knowledge, written on index cards in my neat handwriting. Harold met me in the lobby himself rather than sending an assistant, a gesture that immediately put me at ease. He led me to a conference room where several people were already gathered, including Alice and Kim from the dinner party. "Everyone," Harold announced, "this is Adelaide Peterson, the culinary expert I told you about. For the next hour, I want you all to just listen as she shares her knowledge about authentic American cooking traditions." For the next 2 hours, I talked about my recipes, my techniques, and the stories behind the dishes. The team asked thoughtful questions and took copious notes. At one point, Harold asked if I would be willing to demonstrate some techniques in their test kitchen, and I readily agreed. Before I left that day, Harold presented me with a consulting contract. The terms were generous, far more so than I had expected. I would work with their culinary team 3 days a week for 6 months, helping develop the menu for the new restaurant concept. When I told Sophia about the contract that evening, she was thrilled. "Mom, this is amazing. It's like a whole new chapter for you." It felt that way to me too. At 67, when many of my peers were settling into quiet retirement, I was embarking on a new professional adventure that combined my lifelong passion with my decades of experience. Over the next few months, I worked closely with Harold's team. The head chef, a young man named Marcus, who had trained at the Culinary Institute of America, was initially skeptical of my homestyle techniques. But after tasting my food, he became my strongest advocate, eager to learn the nuances that made my recipes special. I taught them my grandmother's secrets for perfect pie crust, my techniques for building layers of flavor in seemingly simple dishes, and the importance of respecting ingredients. In turn, they taught me about modern kitchen equipment and presentation styles that enhanced rather than overshadowed the authentic flavors. 3 months into my consulting work, Harold invited me to lunch. "Your input has been invaluable, Adelaide," he told me. "The test menu is getting rave reviews from our focus groups. People are responding exactly as I hoped to the authenticity and the stories behind the dishes." "I'm so pleased," I said sincerely. "It's been a joy to see these family recipes refined for a restaurant setting." Harold leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'd like to offer you a more permanent role as our heritage recipe consultant for all our locations as we expand. And I'd like to name one of the signature dishes after you, Adelaide's apple pie." I was deeply touched by the offer. This was far beyond anything I could have imagined when I prepared that fateful dinner party. My recipes, my cooking, which James had so casually dismissed as retirement home food, would now be enjoyed by people across the country. During this time, my relationship with James remained cordial but distant. He had apologized again, more sincerely this time, after Sophia had apparently made it clear that his behavior toward me needed to change permanently. I had forgiven him not because he deserved it, but because holding on to resentment would only hurt me and strain Sophia's marriage further. 6 months after the dinner party, the first restaurant in Harold's new chain Heartland Table was ready to open in Chicago. He had invited me to be a guest of honor at the opening night, along with Sophia and James. The restaurant was beautiful, with warm wood tones, vintage cooking implements as decor, and framed handwritten recipes on the walls, including several of mine. Each menu item came with a short story about its origin, and the servers were trained to share these narratives with guests. When we were seated at our table, James studied the menu with obvious surprise. "Adelaide's heritage chicken," he read aloud. "Your herb-roasted chicken is on the menu." "Yes," I replied calmly, "and my apple pie for dessert." James looked genuinely impressed, perhaps for the first time. "This is remarkable, Adelaide. You must be very proud." "I am," I said simply. Throughout the evening, Harold brought various investors and restaurant critics to our table to meet me. James watched these interactions with a new respect in his eyes. He no longer tried to insert himself or minimize my contribution. Instead, he seemed to be reassessing me entirely. Later that evening, as we enjoyed dessert, James surprised me. "Your apple pie really is exceptional, Adelaide," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I never appreciated it before. Or you." The sincerity in his voice told me this wasn't another strategic apology, but a genuine acknowledgement. People can change when confronted with their own behavior, though sometimes it takes a dramatic reversal of fortune to spark that change. In the years since that dinner party, my life has transformed in ways I never could have predicted. At 68, I'm busier and more fulfilled than I ever expected to be at this stage of life. My relationship with Sophia has deepened as she's seen me step into this new role with confidence. Even James now treats me with a respect that was missing before, though I'm under no illusions that our relationship will ever be warm. The greatest gift, though, has been the opportunity to share my culinary heritage with a wider audience. The recipes that connected me to my grandmother, that nourished my family through decades, that carried the love and traditions of generations, now bring joy to thousands of people who never knew me. Life has a way of serving justice in unexpected ways. That night when James mocked my cooking, calling it retirement home food, I could never have imagined it would lead to a new career and a renewed sense of purpose. Sometimes the things others dismiss about us are precisely what make us special, valuable, and unique. So, if you're ever in Chicago, stop by Heartland Table and try a slice of Adelaide's apple pie. And remember that it's never too late for a new beginning, and that staying true to yourself and your passions can lead to the sweetest revenge of all success and happiness on your own terms. Has anyone ever dismissed something you were passionate about, only to have it turn out to be valuable later? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of kitchen justice served warm, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need a reminder that our authentic selves are always worth honoring. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the best response to mockery is simply to keep doing what you love with all your heart.